Hello, and welcome to my little series on Christmas know-how. When you see this tree in the last of these 5 programs, it'll be finished. It's only just started. Now, when I realized that for over 20 years I've been doing Christmas cookery on television, stage, and in national newspapers, I thought the one constructive thing that I could offer was a series of items that I've made for Christmas and found out over the years the absolutely easiest and most delicious and successful ways of doing it. And this is what I'm going to try and share with you in these 5 programs, starting with Christmas birds. And of course, we start with the most important of all, the turkey, which is, after all, the British national bird. Now, this curious pinching movement that I'm doing here isn't just silly, and it isn't to hide the fact that I'm scared stiff when I meet you all for the beginning of a program, because I am, but to loosen the skin so that afterwards I can put my hand underneath and run it right through the skin so that it holds right away from the breast of the upper part of the bird, like that. You see, turkey, let's face it, traditional as it is a very dry bird. So if you get leaf-thin slices of ham or gammon, this is gammon, of course, because my purse won't run to raw ham these days. I don't know whose purse runs to anything. And you get the raw ham or the raw gammon in these paper-thin slices, cut the rind off, and then run it under the skin and over the upper part of the bird like this. You begin the process of lubricating the dry bird. This is only the beginning of it, you see. And over you go, right up and right over, and spread it through. Then, when you've got these 4 in, you begin with something else, which is mushrooms. And I beg of you, if you decide to copy this, and it honestly is the most exciting and delicious way, and now I always do my Christmas turkey this way, when you do yours, please not only remove the stalks, but remember to leave the skin on your mushrooms and put them in like this. Now, you've got the gammon in, just the gammon, and now you push the mushrooms in like this. Of course, they go down a bit when it starts cooking. In fact, they flatten completely by the end of the cooking time. As well they might do, because it doesn't do much for the bird's figure, let's face it. But then, on the other hand, it wouldn't do very much for ours, would it? There we go, pushing them all through. And now, when the bird starts to cook, the juices from the unsoaked ham or gammon, now I stress that although it's all written down in the Christmas Know-How book, which you'll hear about at the end of the program, the unsoaked gammon provides the salt a far better way than with actual salt. In fact, in really super French kitchens, chefs have a thing they call the jambon de Bayonne, a Bayonne ham, hanging up, and they take little slivers off it and toss it into their sauces and their soups for the salty seasoning, which is far, far better. As I said, it doesn't do much for the bird's figure, but there it is. All those inside, and all those juices run down, and they lubricate it and offset the dryness. And gracious me, she's done all that to the bird, but she hasn't put the stuffing in. Well, I'm rather proud of this. I think some of you have seen it before. But I decided the time had come to invent a way of getting the stuffing into a bird without untrussing it and then being faced with having to truss it all over again, especially when you don't know how to do the trussing job. So now I fill it into a nylon icing bag with no pipe affixed. And then all I've got to do is just squeeze until the bird's full. And that is full. Now, before I leave that end, I'm going to take a piece of foil. I'm going to put it over the parson's nose because it does tend to blacken during the cooking. And that finishes that end. And then I take another bag of stuffing. You see, a nylon bag like this. And then I push it up there and get that stuffing in that end. And that's all there is to it. Then you lift it onto a perfectly dry baking tin like this. Crash. And then a little bit of butter, or if you can't run to butter, then a little bit of dripping. But no dripping in the pan. Oh, dear me, no. Because, you see, if you do this, then you can pour good bone stock all round in the meat baking tin, and then you make the beginnings of a most beautiful sauce, gravy, jus, whatever you like to call it, because all the other juices run into that as well, and like that it gets baked at gas mark 4. There you are, my darling. Here's my Sarah again to help me. Gas mark 4, at least 1 shelf below centre, and you give it half an hour for the first pound and 20 minutes for every pound thereafter. Now there, instead, is a Christmas goose. The kind of thing, you know, that the maiden aunt that you always have because she's lonely on Christmas Day, or some other elderly lonely person, says, oh, I can't eat goose because, you see, it does repeat so. Well, this way, it never repeats on anybody because you get rid of all this extra fatty substances, and I'll tell you exactly how it happens. You prod it all over. You think of somebody you've never really liked. I'll let that go for the moment and then pick it up again in a minute. Prod it all over. Think of somebody you've never really liked, but you're too well bred to say what you think of them, so you take it out on the goose until it's stabbed all over. Then you put the rack back, and then, beastly job this, you dip your hands into thin honey, and you coat the goose all over. Now, what happens during the cooking time is that the surplus fat erupts over all those little holes and starts running down in rivulets, crisping the skin, doing its own basting, and you end up with a gorgeously crisp skin, which is part of the eating pleasure, but the fat runs down into the baking tin below. Only one word of warning here, and that is, I've put this, of course, in the booklet, like everything else, and all the different stuffings that you use for all the different birds. But I must stress that at half-time, and all your cooking times there again, I use gas mark 5 for this bird, but 1 shelf below centre, in the booklet. You must empty the tin of its fat a bit because it gets overfull and can be dangerous at the end of the cooking time. Now, let's get that one out of the way and merely show you a duck placed on an ordinary grill rack, such as we all have, do you see? And you do a duck in precisely the same way as a goose, only you don't cook it for so long, but it's the same old thing. Stab it all over with the fork, rub it with the thin honey, and leave the pan absolutely dry for the fat of the duck to accumulate the same as the goose. But supposing you don't want either, well then, there's the question of the chicken. The person who's, well, there's only 2 people for Christmas, or somebody who lives alone. There you do this same skin-pinching thing, like this, till you can run your hand underneath it, and then you just use the mushrooms, because they make the most gorgeous flavour. But you don't need to lubricate with the gammon as well, because this is not a dry bird. So you just push a few mushrooms under the skin, and that's all ready to eat and enjoy. And you do exactly the same thing with a capon. And here is a capon for you to look at while I'm talking to you about this. Mushrooms, a little bit of butter over the chicken, little bit of butter over the capon. We'll pretend that the mushrooms are in there because you know it by now and you don't want to see it again. And with both these, the same trick, only a little butter, and then the jus, the bone stock that you've made separately, poured into the pan so that it draws in all the juices of the roasting bird and makes your sauce for you without any trouble. And now, let's draw breath. Let me wipe my hands clean because I want to tackle the thing that men infuriate me over most. And I want to share with you how French women cope with this thing without any interference from the male. I'm no women's lib, don't think for a moment. I'm not such a clot. But there are times when men do make fools of themselves. Haven't you seen them getting scarlet in the face and struggling with the Christmas bird when they do the carving, using this ridiculous thing with a fork guard and a special carving knife? All you need is a pliable French knife like this and an ordinary table fork, and it's perfectly safe. Now, I'm going to do this very slowly so that you can see exactly. Now, I'm going to turn this bird this side first of all and show you. You make a stroke where the skin joins the leg and thigh. You reverse the knife so that if it slips, it can't do you any harm. You put the fork inside and you just pull until you can see the bone. And instead of that purple-faced struggling that you get from Pa, you merely cut through, turn it over, and there's the thigh. Let's put them on this little dish that I've just piped with a bit of potato. The leg. Now I'll do that again on the other side, the reverse way. No, I'll do it that way, shan't I? Like that. Cut through, reverse the knife, Push until you can see the bone. There it is. I believe you can see it if I put my knife up against it. And then you cut through, turn it over. You don't get flushed, you don't get hot, you don't have to mop yourself with a streaming forehead when you sit down like Pa. Let's put the leg there, and let's put the thigh there. Now we'll come to the wings. We'll stay on this side. One cut. Push aside, so, until you can see it, straight down, and there's a very handsome wing to sit on the dish. Turn it, it's this way. One cut, and down, pull it aside. It's as easy as shelling peas, isn't it? And nobody wants those nasty little paper-thin slices they give you in restaurants. But first of all, let's talk about this. Parson's nose off. If you're keen on it like I am, you hide it. Then you take the blunt side of a knife and you run it straight down the bird like this until it sinks in. And where it sinks in is the right place to make the cut for the wishbone. At least I shall look a silly clot if it isn't. Down you go, turn your knife, push it apart. There's the wishbone, which on a bigger bird, of course, you would divide in two. It's exactly the same thing for turkey, for goose, for everything. But when it comes to the breast flesh, none of those little papery bits, as I said. This is an ordinary pair of gardener's secateurs. All right, I've sterilized them. But if you haven't got proper poultry secateurs, and they're jolly difficult to get hold of these days, you just go through the bone like this with a pair of secateurs. And then snip it off round there, like that. Think of this for a moment as a really big one, and I'm going to take both of them off for you to see. And you see, it's so quick. Actually, we've timed me on this, and if I'm not talking, you can carve a chicken completely in 3.5 minutes. Now then, make an incision there. Make an incision there. And everybody gets a lovely fat lumpy bit instead of those beastly bits tasting up the knife. Then take your secateurs and snip through the bone. One. I did scrub my hands before I started. And snip through there, snip through there, and snip through there. Now, isn't that much easier? And that is my whole aim and object in these programs, to share with you the ways that I have found that life is easier for the housewife, because, you know, it's my considered opinion that Christmas is just about slave labor for the woman. We shall deal with the question of nitty mince pies, because I got fed up with those. Men hate them anyway. We shall deal with the question of saving time on that. We shall deal with the question of saving time over the Christmas pudding, over everything, in fact. And now, before I go, just to show you what happens to the mushrooms, Sarah and I, there's your presentation dish. Sarah and I roasted a chicken with the mushrooms underneath. And there they are, do you see? All beautifully moistening the bird and sitting shrunk completely. Its shape has come back again, ready for you to carve it. Thank you so much for watching. Next time, we're going to revive the lovely, old-fashioned, round Christmas pudding.